I never thought I would learn the truth about my own wife from a $67 brake rotor. That is the honest truth, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my life. For 17 years, I trusted Megan with everything I had: my home, my son, and the financial books of the small auto repair shop I had built from nothing in Harlan, Kentucky. Weber's garage was 2 hydraulic lifts, 2 full-time mechanics, a grease-stained concrete floor I had poured and leveled myself, and my last name painted on the sign out front in block letters that I stenciled by hand the summer I turned 24. I opened the shop in 2008 with $11,000 I had saved working pipeline jobs after high school, sleeping in motel rooms, and sending money home to a savings account at First National Bank every 2 weeks without fail. The first year was brutal. I worked 70-hour weeks, slept on a cot in the back office more nights than I care to count, and ate gas station sandwiches for dinner because I could not afford to close the shop long enough to drive home for a meal. My Uncle Virgil, who had taught me everything I knew about engines in his garage in Lynch, Kentucky, came down on weekends to help me build the customer base, handing out business cards at church and at the high school football games. By the end of 2009, I had enough steady work to hire Dale Blevins, a quiet man from Everts with hands that could diagnose a misfire by touch alone. Marcus Crawford came aboard 2 years later, fresh out of a vocational program and eager to learn. The three of us built Weber's garage into something real, one oil change and one brake job at a time, and I married Megan Reynolds in 2007, the year before I opened the doors. We already had Ryan by then. He was 4, born when I was still a 19-year-old kid running pipeline, but Megan believed in the plan when most people thought I was out of my mind. I spent the next 16 years turning that $11,000 into a business bringing in roughly $180,000 a year in gross revenue. Not enough to make anyone rich, but enough to pay 2 good mechanics fair wages, keep the lights on and the air compressor running, and put my son Ryan through community college while he apprenticed with me on the lifts every afternoon. Megan started handling the bookkeeping in 2011, 3 years after I opened. She managed invoices, processed parts orders through our supplier Consolidated Auto Parts in Lexington, and ran payroll for Dale Blevins and Marcus Crawford, my 2 full-time guys. I paid her $24,000 a year, deposited into her personal checking account. She came in 3 mornings a week to sit at the desk in our small office and type numbers into Mitchell 1, our shop management software. I never questioned a single figure she put in front of me. She was my wife. She had a degree in business administration from Southeast Kentucky Community and Technical College. She understood spreadsheets and ledgers in a way that I, a man whose primary skill set involved torque wrenches and diagnostic scanners, simply did not. I trusted her the way I trusted the hydraulic lines on my lifts, completely, automatically, because the alternative was something my mind would not even entertain. That trust lasted 17 years, through good seasons and lean ones, through the winter when the furnace in the shop broke and I worked in my coat for 2 weeks, through the summer when we cleared $12,000 in a single month and I thought we might actually get ahead. She sat at that desk. She typed those numbers. And she stole from me every single month for 3 years without blinking. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in March of 2024. I had just finished replacing the water pump on a 2019 Chevy Silverado for a man named Gerald Pruitt. Gerald was 63, retired from the coal mines, and he had been bringing his trucks to my shop since before Ryan was born. He was the kind of customer who paid cash from a wallet held together with a rubber band and never complained unless something was genuinely wrong. So when he walked back through my bay door that Tuesday holding 2 receipts, I knew immediately that something was off. He set the papers on my workbench next to a socket set and pointed at the line items. "Craig, I am not trying to start anything," he said, "but I got charged twice for the same radiator hose on 2 different invoices 3 weeks apart, and that does not sit right with me." I wiped my hands on a shop rag and looked at the 2 invoices. He was right. One from February 8th showed a Gates radiator hose, part number 21573, at $44. The other, dated February 26th, showed the exact same part billed under a work order number I did not recognize. I had personally replaced that radiator hose in early February, spending 20 minutes with channel locks and a propane torch, freeing a rusted clamp. One hose, one job, one invoice. The second piece of paper should not have existed in any universe. I told Gerald I would sort it out and refunded the duplicate on the spot, $44 cash from the register. He thanked me and drove off. I stood in the bay holding those two invoices and felt something cold and unfamiliar settle into the bottom of my stomach. The work order on that second paper did not correspond to any real job. That night, I sat in my truck in the driveway for 15 minutes before going inside, running through explanations that might make the second invoice innocent. Maybe Megan had made a clerical error. Maybe she had accidentally duplicated the entry. Maybe Mitchell 1 had glitched and created a phantom record. I wanted those explanations to be true with a desperation that surprised me. But I had been fixing things my entire adult life: engines, transmissions, electrical systems. And the one skill that transfers from mechanical work to every other area of life is the ability to recognize when something is broken versus when something has been broken on purpose. That second invoice was not a glitch. It was too clean, too complete, too perfectly formatted. Somebody had created it deliberately, and Megan was the only person with the access and the knowledge to do it. I went inside, kissed her on the cheek, and sat down for dinner feeling like I was swallowing broken glass. The next morning, I walked into the office while Megan was out at a dentist appointment in Middlesbrough, sat at her desk, and pulled up Mitchell 1. I searched the suspicious work order number and found it in the database, typed clean and professional, Gerald's name and truck information correct, but the labor hours did not correspond to any job Dale or Marcus had logged on their timesheets. I checked the parts receipts from Consolidated. The Gates hose had been ordered once, delivered once, and installed once. The second invoice was a fabrication, a phantom document that existed for one purpose: to collect $44 from a retired coal miner who trusted me with his trucks. I sat in that chair for 10 minutes staring at the screen. Then I closed the program, put everything back exactly as Megan had left it, and I did not say a single word to her when she came home that evening. I ate dinner, I washed the dishes. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling until 2 in the morning. The next day I pulled Ryan aside in the empty parking lot at 6:45 before the shop opened. Ryan was 21, broad-shouldered and quiet, the kind of young man who showed up 15 minutes early every day and never needed to be told twice how to torque a lug nut to spec. He had been apprenticing with me since he was 17 and knew the shop systems almost as well as I did. I showed him the two invoices and laid out what I had found. His face went through 4 expressions in 10 seconds: confusion, disbelief, the recognition that I was serious, and then something colder that I recognized from my own reflection that morning. "You think Mom did this on purpose?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I told him I did not know yet, but I needed his help, and no one else, not Dale, not Marcus, not a single soul, could know what we were doing until we understood the full scope. We agreed to pull every invoice from the past 12 months without alerting anyone, and to cross-reference each one against the parts delivery records from Consolidated and the labor logs in Mitchell 1. We would work at night, separately, and share our findings through the Google Drive spreadsheet so that there was a real-time record of what we had found and when. I remember Ryan standing in the parking lot that morning with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath visible in the cold air, and the look on his face was one I had never seen before. It was the look of a young man who has just been asked to investigate his own mother for theft, and who has realized that he is going to do it because the alternative is worse. He nodded once and went inside to start the day, and neither of us said another word about it until that evening when the first entries appeared on the shared spreadsheet. What Ryan and I did over the next 2 weeks was the most tedious, painstaking, and heartbreaking work I have ever done. And I say that as a man who once replaced a rusted frame rail on a 1997 Ford F250 in an unheated shop in February. Every night after Megan went to bed at 10, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a stack of invoices I had quietly photocopied during the day, comparing each one against parts delivery receipts from Consolidated and labor logs in Mitchell 1. Ryan worked at his apartment across town, covering different months. We set up a shared Google Drive spreadsheet and color-coded every entry: green for verified, yellow for questionable, red for confirmed fraud. We started with 2023 and expanded outward. By the end of the first week, we had found 11 more ghost invoices from the previous 12 months. The pattern was as clear and as ugly as oil on white paper. The method was simple and nearly invisible. When a cash-paying customer settled their bill, Megan would record the payment normally and drop the money into the register. Then, days later, she would process a fictitious refund in Mitchell 1, voiding the transaction as if the customer had returned for a correction, and pocket the original cash that was sitting in the drawer. To the books, it looked like revenue came in and went right back out, a clean wash. She also padded our supply orders, recording phantom purchases of shop consumables, oil absorbent, brake cleaner, shop towels, from vendors we paid in cash, creating paper justification for money that went straight into her purse. The individual amounts ranged from $22 for a voided spark plug replacement to $312 for a catalytic converter logged as a warranty return that never happened. She was exploiting the gap between my knowledge of engines and my ignorance of accounting with a consistency that chilled me to the bone. The second week of the investigation broke something inside me that has never fully healed. We expanded the audit all the way back to January 2021, 3 full years, pulling records from the filing cabinet and the Mitchell 1 digital archives. The spreadsheet grew longer and redder each night. There were fraudulent refunds and phantom supply orders in every single month across all 36, sometimes 2 in a slow period, sometimes 5 during the busy summer season when the shop was handling 40 jobs a week and individual entries were nearly impossible to examine closely. Megan had been strategic about it. She rotated through our customer list so that no single person was hit more than twice in any 12-month span. She kept most individual amounts below $500, which ensured the monthly totals never deviated from our normal revenue patterns. She had turned my shop into a personal cash machine with the patience and discipline of someone who planned to keep doing it for the rest of her life. When Ryan and I tallied every confirmed fraudulent invoice across those 3 years, the final number was $27,416. I stared at that figure on the spreadsheet at 1 a.m. in Ryan's apartment kitchen, and the room tilted. That was money stolen from the business I had built with my own hands, from the livelihood that fed my family, from customers who trusted me. It worked out to roughly $760 a month, or $190 a week, skimmed so quietly and so steadily that neither I, nor my mechanics, nor a single customer had noticed. Ryan was sitting across from me, both our laptops glowing with the red highlighted total, and neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he asked the question I had been circling for 14 days without the courage to face it directly. "Where did the money go, Dad?" $27,000 had not gone into our mortgage, which was current, but not a penny ahead. It had not gone into Ryan's tuition, which I paid directly from the business account each semester. It had not gone into home improvements, or a vehicle, or medical bills, or any major purchase I could identify by walking through our house and looking at what we owned. The money had vanished into the black box of Megan's personal spending, an area I had virtually no visibility into because we had kept separate checking accounts for years. That had been her idea, proposed in 2015 with the argument that it would prevent arguments about individual purchases. I had agreed because I did not want to be the kind of husband who monitors his wife's receipts. Now I understood why she had pushed for that arrangement, and the understanding sat in my chest like a block of engine iron. I told Ryan we had to trace the money before we even thought about confronting her. If we went in with half the picture, she would fill the empty spaces with whatever lies served her best, and we would be back at square one with nothing to show for it. We both knew Megan well enough to understand that she was intelligent, articulate, and entirely capable of constructing a convincing narrative on the fly. If she had been clever enough to run a 3-year embezzlement scheme without detection, she was certainly clever enough to talk her way out of a confrontation that was not backed by absolutely airtight evidence. Ryan agreed without hesitation. He had the same instinct I did, the mechanical instinct, the instinct of a man who knows you do not start reassembling an engine until you have identified every single failed component, because if you miss one, you will just have to take it all apart again. Ryan found the connection to Kevin Driscoll almost by accident during the 3rd week of our investigation. He was studying credit card statements I had photographed from a folder in Megan's desk drawer at home while she was at the Kroger in Middlesbrough. I had felt physically sick doing it, creeping through my own wife's papers in my own house. But we needed the truth. Ryan found a series of charges to a travel website called Getaway Deals. 3 separate hotel reservations in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, about 3 hours south through the mountains. September 2022, April 2023, November 2023. Each was for a long weekend. I had not gone to Gatlinburg with Megan on any of those dates. She had told me each time she was visiting her college friend Diane in Knoxville. I had never thought to verify it, because why would I? She was my wife, and I trusted her word like I trusted the laws of physics. Ryan checked her email. I had the password from when she asked me to look for an Amazon shipping confirmation 2 years earlier and never changed the credentials, and found the reservation confirmations. Each booking was for 2 guests. The second guest on all 3 reservations was listed as Kevin Driscoll. The name struck me like a breaker bar to the sternum. Kevin was our UPS driver, had been for about 4 years since the previous man on the route retired. He was 33 or 34, tall, with a reddish goatee and forearms like steel cable, and he wore that brown uniform like it was tailored on Savile Row. He always had a joke, always lingered longer than the FedEx driver or the consolidated delivery man, always found a reason to step inside the shop instead of just leaving a package at the bay door. I had thought he was personable. I had thought he was a nice guy. I had never, in my life, been more wrong about a human being. Then Ryan told me something that made the edges of my vision go dark and narrow. Dad, I've been noticing for a while that Kevin's truck sits in our lot way longer than it should, he said, his voice flat and careful. Sometimes 20, 30 minutes. I always figured he was eating in his cab, but he was never in the cab. He was inside the office with Mom. I never thought anything of it. He stopped talking and stared at the credit card statements spread across his kitchen table, jaw muscles tight beneath the skin. I thought about all the times Kevin had stood in my shop, shaken my hand, called me by my first name while delivering boxes of brake pads and rotors and oil filters that I needed to keep my business running. I thought about the time he helped carry a heavy box of transmission parts to the back bay. He had smiled and said, "No problem, Craig. Happy to help." He had been sleeping with my wife at the time. The man who helped me carry a box across my own shop floor was the same man who spent weekends with my wife in a hotel room 160 miles away, wearing a $1,400 watch she bought with money she stole from the register I had filled with my own labor. The disconnect between those two realities was so enormous that my brain kept trying to reject it, like a computer crashing on an input it was never designed to process. I sat there in Ryan's kitchen and felt the kind of anger that does not burn hot the way people describe it in movies and books. It freezes. It turns everything inside you into cold, clear, perfectly transparent glass. And through that glass, you can see the entire ugly architecture of the lie, every beam and joint and nail, and you understand with terrible, irreversible clarity how long it took to construct and how deliberately each piece was placed. Over the following days, Ryan and I mapped the financial trail connecting Megan's embezzlement to her affair with Kevin Driscoll. We matched the Gatlinburg hotel charges to specific weeks when Megan had pulled unusually large petty cash amounts. 520 before the September trip, 380 before April, 450 before November. We found charges on her personal credit card for 2 men's Citizen EcoDrive watches from Morrison's Fine Jewelry in Lexington. $640 for one, $780 for the other. Those were obviously not for me, since I had worn the same $15 Casio digital every day for a decade. We found restaurant charges in towns 40 and 50 miles from Harlan, where no one would recognize her face. We found a monthly charge of $79 to a prepaid phone service she had never mentioned. A burner for communicating with Kevin without leaving traces. Roughly 11,000 of the 27,000 total had gone directly to the affair. Hotels, watches, dinners, the hidden phone. The remaining 16,000 had been absorbed into Megan's personal spending, clothes, spa visits in Lexington, untraceable ATM cash withdrawals. The picture was now complete, and it was uglier and more elaborate than anything I could have imagined when Gerald Pruitt walked in with 2 receipts for a $44 radiator hose. I wanted to walk into the shop the next morning and confront her in front of everyone. I wanted to tell Kevin exactly what I thought of him the next time his brown truck pulled into my lot. The fury was enormous and physical, like a pressure building inside a sealed engine block with nowhere to go. But Ryan sat me down in a chair in his kitchen, put a bottle of water in my hand, and said words that probably saved me from ruining everything. "Dad, if you blow up now, she will destroy evidence. She will cry and play the victim. She will call everyone she knows and tell them you are controlling and paranoid and abusive. In a town where 1,600 people all know each other, your version of events will not matter if hers gets there first." He was 21 years old, and he was right about every single word. Harlan is a place where gossip travels faster than a fuel injector can misfire, and the first narrative to reach the public square becomes the accepted truth regardless of the facts. If I made a scene without ironclad, organized proof, Megan could spin it however she wanted, and half the county would believe her before I opened my mouth. So we planned. We would continue documenting quietly. We would hire a lawyer. We would not tip our hand until every piece of the case was locked down absolutely tight. Over the next several days, Ryan and I reviewed the spreadsheet one final time, double-checking every red entry against its source documents, making sure that each fraudulent invoice had a corresponding lack of parts delivery receipt and labor log to prove it was fabricated. We numbered the evidence, created an index, and printed backup copies that I stored in a lockbox in the bed of my truck. If Megan somehow discovered what we were doing and tried to destroy records at the shop, we would still have everything we needed. Ryan suggested we also photograph every page of the binder in the office, and he spent an afternoon doing exactly that while Megan was at her hair appointment, uploading the images to a cloud account she did not know existed. We were not taking any chances. We had one shot to do this right. The lawyer was Patricia Holbrook, and her office on Central Street smelled like old coffee and legal pads. I had known Pat for years. She handled a liability case when a customer claimed his brakes failed after we serviced his truck, and she dismantled his argument in one letter. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired, sharp as a carbide drill bit, and had zero tolerance for people who wasted her time or lied to her face. Ryan and I sat across from her on a Thursday in early April and laid out everything. The 14-page spreadsheet printed and color-coded, the hotel confirmations, the credit card statements, the burner phone charge, and a written timeline. Pat studied it for 20 minutes in absolute silence. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Craig, this is theft by deception under Kentucky Revised Statute 514.040. At $27,000, it is a Class C felony, 1 to 5 years. You have more than enough for both a divorce with cause and a criminal prosecution." She asked whether I wanted to go criminal, civil, or both. I told her both without hesitation. This was not just a marital dispute about money. This was a calculated criminal enterprise that had victimized my customers, working people, retired people, people who trusted my name on that sign. Ryan nodded beside me. Pat looked at us both for a long moment, and I think she saw something in our faces that told her we were not going to back down or accept a quiet settlement. She took off her reading glasses, set them on her desk, and said, "Good. Then here is what we are going to do." She laid out the strategy in clear, methodical terms. First, a divorce petition citing adultery and financial fraud, requesting sole ownership of the shop. Second, a formal evidence package for the Harlan County Commonwealth's attorney. Third, an emergency restraining order barring Megan from the shop's finances the moment papers were served. Pat explained that under Kentucky law, a spouse who systematically embezzles from a family business can be ordered to pay full restitution in the divorce, independent of any criminal sentence. She estimated 4 to 6 months for the divorce and longer for the criminal case. I signed her retainer that afternoon for $2,500, money from my personal savings that I considered the best investment I had ever made. And Ryan and I drove back to the shop in silence, passing the UPS distribution center on Route 421 without exchanging a word. The plan was in motion. The lawyer was hired. The evidence was organized and indexed and backed up in 3 separate locations. All that remained was to choose the date and pull the trigger, and the waiting felt like holding my breath underwater while counting the seconds until I could surface. The week before filing day, I drove out to the cemetery on Clover Fork Road, where my Uncle Virgil was buried. He had passed in 2018, the year I turned 34, and I still missed him in the particular way you miss the person who taught you how to work. I stood at his headstone and talked to him out loud like a man who has lost his mind, telling him what Megan had done and what Ryan and I were about to do. I told him I was scared, not of the legal process, but of the aftermath, of what my life was going to look like on the other side of this. I told him I wished he were here to hand me a wrench and tell me to stop thinking so much and start fixing things, the way he used to when I was 18 and overwhelmed by a job that looked bigger than my skills. The wind blew through the cemetery pines, and the headstone said nothing back, but I felt steadier when I left than when I arrived. Sometimes just saying the truth out loud, even to stone and grass and silence, is enough to keep your hands from shaking. The final days before we acted were an exercise in emotional endurance I would not wish on my worst enemy. Every evening, I sat across the dinner table from the woman who had stolen $27,000 from me and spent weekends in a Gatlinburg hotel room with the man who delivered brake pads to my shop. Megan talked about grocery prices going up, about the neighbor's German Shepherd getting loose, about a recipe she had seen on Facebook for slow cooker pot roast, about whether we should repaint the kitchen cabinets this summer. I nodded at the right moments. I chewed food that tasted like cardboard. I washed the dishes, went to bed, and stared at the ceiling in the dark, surrounded by numbers and dates and hotel confirmations. Ryan told me later those 2 weeks were the hardest of his life. Every morning he walked into the shop, saw Megan at her desk typing invoices, and had to say, "Morning, Mom," like nothing had changed. Once during that stretch, Kevin pulled his UPS truck into the lot and carried a heavy box through the bay door, and he and Megan stood at the parts counter laughing about something while Ryan lay on the creeper under a Dodge Ram 6 feet away. Ryan told me he gripped his ratchet handle so hard his knuckles went white and stayed that way for 10 minutes. We held it together. We stuck to the plan. And on Monday, April 15th, 2024, Pat filed the divorce petition at the Harlan County Circuit Court Clerk's office at 9 in the morning. At 9:15, a process server named Rodney Barker walked through the bay door carrying a manila envelope. I was at the alignment rack pretending to check the tow angle on a Honda Civic, positioned for a clear sightline through the office window. Ryan was on the far lift, watching the office door. Rodney confirmed Megan's identity and placed the envelope in her hands. She opened it, read the first page, then the second, and I watched through the glass as the color drained from her face. She went white, then red, then white again. Her eyes found mine through the window, and I will never forget that look for as long as I draw breath. It was not guilt. It was not shame. It was the calculating panic of a person whose carefully constructed scheme has been blown open and who is already running through lies and angles at a speed that would be impressive if it were not so deeply ugly. She walked out of the office into the bay, papers clutched in her hand, and said, "Craig, what is this? This is absolutely insane. You cannot file for divorce without talking to me first." Her voice was controlled, reasonable, perfectly pitched. I looked at that face, the one I had looked at across breakfast tables for 17 years, and said, "Megan, everything I have to say is in those papers. You are relieved of all bookkeeping duties. Your access to Mitchell 1 is revoked. Patricia Holbrook will contact you regarding the $27,000 you stole from this business." The word stole hit the bay like a dropped transmission. Dale looked up. Marcus stopped mid-wrench. Ryan climbed down from the lift and stood watching his mother. What followed over the next 72 hours was precisely what Ryan had predicted. Megan did not cry. She did not apologize. She did not collapse or beg. She went on the offensive. Within an hour, she called her mother, her sister Tammy, her cousin Brenda, and at least 4 friends, spinning each a different version where I was the villain, controlling, paranoid, possibly cheating myself. By noon, my phone was ringing with decades-long acquaintances asking what was going on, telling me they heard I was throwing her out with nothing. I let every call go to voicemail. Ryan handled walk-ins at the shop, calmly saying there was documentation and the truth would come out through the legal process. Dale and Marcus kept their heads down and worked. They were solid men who knew when to mind their business. The town started picking sides within 48 hours, which is what small towns do when a marriage detonates in public. Most people, once they heard even a fraction of the evidence, came down on my side. But Megan had friends, and her mother had friends, and there was a subset of people in Harlan who had decided based on nothing but loyalty and gossip that I was overreacting, that every couple has money problems, that I should have handled it privately instead of involving lawyers and police. A woman I had never met stopped me outside the post office and told me I ought to be ashamed of myself for putting my wife through this. I looked at her and said nothing, because there was nothing I could say to a stranger that would change her mind, and I had learned from Ryan that the truth, when it is properly documented and patiently presented, speaks louder than any argument you can make on a sidewalk. The criminal referral moved fast. Pat had sent the evidence to the Commonwealth's attorney the same day, and within 8 days, Sergeant Dwight Combs from the Kentucky State Police called me. I sat in a cinder-block interview room at the Harlan Post and spent 3.5 hours walking Combs through every fraudulent invoice, every ghost work order, every petty cash withdrawal. I brought the printed spreadsheet, original invoices in plastic sleeves, Mitchell 1 screenshots, and delivery receipts from Consolidated. Combs was the old-school kind. Spiral notebook, ballpoint pen. Same question asked 3 different ways. Ryan went in separately the next day with his own statement. At the end of my interview, Combs closed his notebook and said, almost gently, that these cases were more common than people realized, and that I should not blame myself. That was the only moment I came close to completely breaking down in front of another person. Kevin Driscoll learned about the divorce from Megan and made the spectacularly poor decision to keep showing up at my shop as if nothing had happened. The following Tuesday, his brown truck pulled in, he grabbed a box, and walked through the bay door grinning. "Got your rotors, Craig. 2 Brembo fronts." I was at the workbench 4 feet away. Ryan was behind me on the lift, and I felt him go still. I looked at Kevin for a long moment and said, "Kevin, I know about you and Megan. I know about Gatlinburg, the watches from Morrison's, the hotel rooms booked for 2. You are not welcome here. Have your dispatcher assign a different driver, because if I see you walk through that door again, this conversation will not be so polite." The grin dropped off his face like a bumper hitting a pothole. He opened his mouth, closed it, glanced at Ryan staring down from the lift platform, and walked out without a word. His truck was gone in under 30 seconds. I called UPS Regional that afternoon for a permanent route change. The new UPS driver who started our route the following week was a woman named Linda, middle-aged and professional, who scanned packages at the door and was gone in under a minute. She never lingered. She never cracked jokes. She never set foot inside the shop, and I appreciated that more than she could possibly have known. Every time I heard the rumble of a brown delivery truck pulling into the lot, something tightened in my chest for a fraction of a second before I remembered that it was not Kevin anymore, that Kevin was gone, that the person behind that wheel was just doing her job and had no connection to any of it. That reflex, the involuntary clench in the gut at the sound of a diesel engine in the parking lot, faded over the months, but it took longer than I expected, and I am not entirely certain it has disappeared even now. Megan moved out within a week, going to her mother's place on Ivy Hill Road, 4 miles across town. She took her clothes, personal items, and the framed wedding photograph that had hung in the hallway for 16 years. I changed the locks on Pat's advice. The shop continued operating because trucks still needed brakes regardless of what was burning down in my personal life. I hired Janet Sloan as bookkeeper, 61, 32 years of accounting experience, arrived 3 mornings a week with her own coffee in a steel thermos and a mechanical pencil behind her ear. Janet was methodical, precise, and entirely humorless about numbers, which was exactly the personality I needed sitting at that desk. Within her first month, she identified 2 additional small discrepancies Ryan and I had missed. $43 here, $67 there, pushing the confirmed embezzlement total past $28,000. Harlan processed the scandal the way small towns always do. Slowly, thoroughly, and with an enthusiasm for detail that would humble a forensic accountant. By the end of April, everyone in town knew. The woman at the Piggly Wiggly checkout, the barber on Main Street, Pastor Williams at First Baptist. People I had never spoken to stopped me at the gas station to say they were sorry, or that they had always sensed something, or that their cousin's wife had done something similar in 2019, and would I like the name of a good therapist. The hardest conversations were with the customers whose names appeared on the ghost invoices. I called every single one. Gerald, Wayne Hoskins, Don and Mary Combs, the Hendricks brothers, explained what happened, and offered full refunds plus a free oil change. Most refused the money. Gerald told me, "Craig, you have fixed every truck I have ever owned. This was not your fault, and you do not owe me a dime." I hung up and sat alone in the office for a long time with the door closed. The house felt different after Megan left. Quieter, obviously, but also lighter in a way that I had not expected. I had braced myself for loneliness, and instead found a strange, raw kind of peace. I could sit at my own kitchen table and drink coffee without wondering what lie was being constructed behind the office door at the shop. I could go to bed and not listen for the soft vibration of a hidden phone receiving a message. I relearned what it felt like to live in a space where the air was not saturated with deception, and it was both a relief and an indictment, a reminder of how long I had been breathing that poisoned air without realizing it was poisoned. Ryan came over for dinner twice a week, and we grilled steaks or made chili and talked about the shop, about his future, about the case, about everything except the empty chair at the end of the table where Megan used to sit. Criminal charges were filed in June 2024. Megan's attorney, Daryl Compton, out of Middlesbrough, argued duress, that I was controlling and the withdrawals were her bid for independence. The argument disintegrated under the documented evidence that she earned $24,000 a year in her own account and had unrestricted access to a joint credit card with a $5,000 limit. She had not been a prisoner. She had been a trusted partner who chose theft. Commonwealth's attorney Sandra Whitfield, who had earned a reputation for prosecuting financial crimes with meticulous care, filed 2 counts: theft by deception over $10,000, a Class C felony carrying 1 to 5 years, and forgery in the second degree for the fabricated commercial invoices. The divorce proceedings ran on a parallel track, handled by Pat with the brisk efficiency of 22 years of untangling bad marriages in Harlan County. The months between the filing and the trial were a slow grind of depositions, motions, and court dates that ate time and money the way a bad fuel pump eats gasoline. Pat kept me informed at every stage, but advised me to stay focused on running the shop and to let the legal system do its work. That was harder than it sounds. Every delay, every continuance, every procedural maneuver from Compton's side felt like a personal insult, like the system was protecting the person who had stolen from me. But Pat reminded me that the process, tedious as it was what would ultimately deliver justice in a way that could not be challenged or overturned. So I focused on the shop. I focused on Ryan. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, in the relentless forward motion that is the only real antidote to the paralysis of betrayal. Megan contested everything through Compton: property division, adultery claims, fraud allegations, restitution. She demanded a full forensic audit of the shop's books, apparently hoping to find irregularities on my side that would muddy the waters. Barlow and Associates, a CPA firm out of Lexington, put 2 auditors on it for 6 weeks. Their 47-page report confirmed every finding Ryan and I had made, to the penny and the date. They also reclassified $1,900 in transactions we had marked yellow as additionally fraudulent, pushing the total to nearly $30,000. When that report reached Compton's desk, Megan's legal resistance crumbled. The divorce was finalized by Judge Harold Whitaker in September 2024. I kept the shop, the house, and my retirement. Megan got her personal things and her Toyota Camry. The court ordered restitution of $29,800 at $500 a month over 5 years. Pat called me that evening, after the divorce was signed and sealed. She told me it was one of the cleanest outcomes she had achieved in a contested case in years, and that the strength of our evidence had made it nearly impossible for the other side to negotiate from a position of strength. She also told me something that surprised me. She said that in her 22 years of practice, she had seen dozens of cases where a spouse embezzled from a family business, but she had never seen one where the victim and his son had done the preliminary investigation themselves with such thoroughness that the professional forensic accountants had almost nothing to add. "You two would have made decent lawyers," she said. I told her I would stick with engines, and she laughed, and it was the first time I had heard that sound from Pat Holbrook in the 6 months I had been her client. Judge Whitaker, not known for courtroom speeches, said something during the final hearing that has stayed with me word for word. He said, "Mrs. Weber, when a spouse is entrusted with the financial stewardship of a family business, that trust carries the weight of every employee whose paycheck depends on honest accounting, every customer who pays a bill in good faith, and every dollar earned through honest labor. You have violated that trust in a manner this court finds deeply troubling." Megan stared at the table and did not look at me once. The criminal trial began in January 2025. Sandra Whitfield's prosecution was systematic and devastating. She called me first. 2 hours on the stand, walking the jury through every spreadsheet entry, every invoice, every fraudulent work order. I had never spoken publicly about any of this before, and the courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the court reporter's keys clicking between my sentences. I could feel Ryan's tension from across the courtroom when I was on the stand. He was watching me with that focused, protective expression he gets when something important is happening and he wants to make sure it goes right. The same look he has when he is watching a diagnostic reading on a scope, waiting for the pattern to confirm what he already suspects. I answered every question Sandra Whitfield asked me directly, without evasion, without emotion that I could not control. I stated facts. I presented numbers. I pointed to documents. The jury followed along with copies of the spreadsheet in their laps, and I could see some of them making notes in the margins. When Chen asked me how much total had been embezzled, I said, $27,000, $416 confirmed by our investigation, later revised upward to approximately $30,000 by the independent forensic audit. I heard someone in the gallery inhale sharply. In Harlan, $30,000 is not abstract. It is 2 years of car payments. It is a down payment on a house. It is real money earned by real labor. Ryan testified next for an hour and a half, corroborating the investigation and describing Kevin's visits. The truck parked for 30 minutes at a time, the driver absent from the cab, the laughter behind the closed office door. Janet Sloan testified about the discrepancies she had uncovered. A representative from Barlow presented the forensic findings with dry, clinical precision. Sergeant Combs laid out the physical evidence: invoices in plastic sleeves, hotel printouts, credit card statements, the petty cash withdrawals mapped against Gatlinburg trip dates. Compton tried the duress argument one more time, but he was facing 12 jurors from Harlan County who understood what it meant to earn $1 with your hands, and who could recognize the difference between desperation and deliberate, calculated greed. The prosecution's case was a wall of documentation, and Megan's defense had nothing left to throw against it. Throughout the trial, I watched Megan sitting at the defense table and tried to reconcile the woman I saw with the woman I had married 20 years earlier. She looked smaller in that courtroom, diminished, like a person who has been carrying a weight for so long that setting it down has left them shapeless and undefined. She did not look at me during my testimony. She did not look at Ryan during his. She stared at a legal pad on the table in front of her and occasionally leaned over to whisper something to Compton, who would nod or shake his head. I wondered what she was thinking. I wondered if she was calculating her odds or genuinely feeling the weight of what she had done. I will never know the answer to that question, and I have made my peace with not knowing, because the inside of another person's mind is the one diagnostic tool that does not exist in any mechanic's chest. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated 4 hours and 20 minutes. The forewoman, a middle-aged woman in a gray cardigan, stood and read the verdicts. Guilty on count 1, theft by deception over $10,000. Guilty on count 2, forgery in the second degree. I was in the second row and Ryan was beside me. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder once, hard, the way you grip a wrench on a stubborn bolt that finally breaks. Then we sat without speaking while the courtroom processed it around us. Megan was led out through a side door by a deputy. She was wearing a blue blouse I had bought her for her 36th birthday. As she passed our row, she turned and looked at Ryan. Not at me, at Ryan. The expression on her face was the irreversible realization that her own son had helped build the case that put her away. Ryan held her gaze for 2 seconds, then looked at his own hands. I put my arm around him, and we walked into the January cold without a word. Sentencing came 6 weeks later, in March 2025. Judge Patricia Neely gave 3 years in state prison, parole eligibility after 18 months, 5 years of supervised probation, and full restitution. Chen had asked for 4 years. Compton had argued for probation only. 3 felt about right to me, though I will admit that no sentence on earth maps precisely onto 17 years of marriage, $27,000 of theft, and a string of weekends in a Gatlinburg hotel room with a man in a brown uniform. Megan was remanded immediately and transported to the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women in Pewee Valley, roughly 200 miles northwest of Harlan. I drove home from the courthouse alone that evening because Ryan had to go back to the shop to finish a brake job on a Jeep Cherokee that a customer was picking up at 5. That is how life works when you own a small repair shop in eastern Kentucky. The world shifts and cracks, and you still have to finish the brake job. The night after sentencing, Ryan came to the house and we sat in the living room without turning on the television. He had a beer and I had a glass of water, and we sat in the quiet for a long time. "Do you think she is sorry?" he asked finally. I thought about it for a while before answering. I told him I thought Megan was sorry she got caught, and I thought she was sorry she was going to prison, but I was not sure she was sorry for what she did. Not in the way that real remorse works, where you understand the damage you caused and you carry it with you forever. Ryan nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something he had already figured out on his own. "Yeah," he said, "that is what I think too." We finished our drinks and he drove home, and I locked the door and stood in the hallway where the wedding photo used to hang, looking at the clean rectangle of unfaded paint where the frame had been. And I thought about how strange it is that the absence of something can be louder than its presence ever was. Kevin Driscoll was terminated by UPS about 2 months after my formal complaint, officially for violating company policy regarding personal relationships with route customers. He faced no criminal charges because, strictly speaking, he had not participated in the embezzlement. He had merely been the beneficiary of money a woman stole to spend on him. But in Harlan, where reputation is your most valuable currency, his account was bankrupt beyond recovery. He left town within weeks, relocating to Richmond, Kentucky, about 130 miles northeast, where I heard he found work at an auto parts distribution warehouse. Whether what he had with Megan was genuine affection or just a transaction funded by stolen money was a question I decided was not worth the energy to pursue. Some things you have to set down, not because they do not matter, but because carrying them forward costs more than any answer could possibly be worth. Megan wrote Ryan a letter from prison, about 3 weeks after she was transferred to Pewee Valley. He showed it to me, but did not ask me what to do about it, because he had already decided. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, and it said that she loved him, that she was sorry for the pain she had caused, and that she hoped he would visit her when he was ready. She did not mention the theft. She did not mention Kevin. She did not mention the 3 years of lies. She framed the entire situation as a personal failing, a weakness, without ever naming what the failing actually was, or who it had hurt beyond herself. Ryan read it, folded it, put it in his desk drawer, and told me he would think about whether to respond. As far as I know, he has not responded yet, and I have not asked him about it again, because that is a decision that belongs entirely to him and to the complicated, damaged space between a son and the mother who betrayed his family. The rebuilding months were harder in some respects than the investigation and trial combined. When you are hunting for the truth, you have purpose, direction, and momentum. Every highlighted spreadsheet entry brings you closer. When the truth has been fully excavated and the courts have spoken, you are standing in the wreckage with a broom and a dustpan and no instruction manual. I dealt with it the only way I knew how. I threw myself into the shop. Ryan and I added a 3rd hydraulic lift in May, installed it ourselves over a long weekend, and hired a 3rd full-time mechanic named Cassie Owens. Cassie was 24, graduated at the top of her class from the Southeast Kentucky Community and Technical College Automotive Technology program, and she could diagnose an EVAP system leak faster and more accurately than anyone I had ever worked with. Janet kept the books clean. Revenue actually increased after the scandal became public knowledge, because several new customers came in specifically to support an honest operation. Dale and Marcus, who had kept their heads down throughout the entire ordeal and never once asked me a question I was not ready to answer, finally approached me together one afternoon in June of 2025. Dale, who was not a man given to emotional expression under any circumstances, cleared his throat twice before speaking and said, "Craig, we just want you to know that we are glad to be here. This is a good shop, and you are a fair boss, and we are not going anywhere." Marcus, standing beside him with his arms crossed over his chest, nodded firmly. I shook both their hands and thanked them, and after they went back to their lifts, I stood in the office doorway and had to take several deep breaths because the simple, straightforward loyalty of 2 men who just wanted to do honest work and be treated fairly was exactly the thing I needed at that moment and had not known how to ask for. One man drove 40 minutes from Everett's with a transmission issue he could have had fixed at 2 closer shops. He told me, "I heard what your wife did. I wanted to give my business to someone who runs things straight." I shook his hand and gave him a fair price and did careful, clean work, because that is the only thing I have ever known how to do. The relationship between Ryan and me deepened through those months in ways I could not have predicted. We had always been close. He was my only child, and we had worked side by side since he was big enough to hold a flashlight. But surviving a crisis together forges a bond that goes beyond words. On slow afternoons, we sat on overturned 5-gallon buckets by the open bay door and talked about things we had never discussed. Trust, what it takes to keep going after someone wrecks your foundation, how you can love who a person was while despising what they chose to become. Ryan told me the hardest part for him was not the theft or even the affair. It was the realization that his mother had looked him in the eye every single day for 3 years and lied without flinching. All those mornings, he said quietly, staring at the oil-stained concrete between his boots. Making coffee, asking about my day, reminding me to eat lunch. Normal mom stuff. And the entire time she was stealing from us and spending weekends with another man. I did not have an answer for that, and I do not think there is one. Some betrayals cut too deep for words to reach. There are wounds that no amount of talking will heal. You just learn to walk with them, the way you learn to compensate for a knee that never quite works right after a bad fall. Adjusting your strides so gradually that eventually the limp becomes invisible to everyone except the person who carries it. I started seeing a therapist that summer at Ryan's insistence, Dr. Karen Bellows in Middlesbrough, a specialist in family trauma and post-betrayal recovery. I was not enthusiastic about the idea. I am a man who fixes things with tools and diagnostic scanners, and sitting in a chair talking about my emotions felt about as natural as changing oil with a salad fork. The first session was awkward. I sat in her office looking at the diplomas on the wall and could not find a way to begin, because the thing I needed to discuss was so large that no single sentence felt like the right entry point. But Dr. Bellows was patient in the way that good diagnosticians are patient. She knew the problem would reveal itself if she gave it enough time and space. She turned out to be practical and direct. She did not ask how I felt, but what I was going to do about it, and whether my coping strategies were working or merely familiar. There is a difference, Dr. Bellows told me, between a coping mechanism and a habit, and the distinguishing factor is whether it moves you forward or keeps you rooted in place feeling the same pain while pretending you are handling it. That distinction hit me like a diagnostic code on a scanner. Suddenly, the vague symptoms had a name and a number, and once you can name the problem, you can start working toward a solution. I went back the following week, and the week after that, and over several months, she helped me unravel a knot of guilt I had been carrying without realizing how tightly it had been wound. The stubborn, irrational conviction that I should have caught the fraud sooner, that my willingness to trust Megan was actually stupidity dressed in more respectable clothing, that a smarter or more vigilant man would have seen the numbers for what they were. During one session, she said something that I have held on to every single day since. Something that rearranged the way I understood what had happened to me. She said, "Craig, trust is not a character flaw. It is not naivety, and it is not weakness. It is the foundation of every functioning relationship and every functioning business. The person who exploited your trust bears 100% of the moral responsibility for what happened, not the person who offered it in good faith." I wrote those words on the back of a repair order when I got to the shop that afternoon, and taped the paper to the wall above my workbench, where it remains today, next to a torque specification chart and a faded photograph of Ryan at age 12, holding his first socket set and grinning at the camera with grease on his forehead. Ryan proposed to his girlfriend, Amber Lawson, in October 2025, and it was the first unambiguously good thing to happen in our family in nearly 2 years. They had been together since their sophomore year at the community college, and Amber had been a steady, quiet, unflinching presence through the entire ordeal, bringing food during late-night investigation sessions, sitting in the courtroom gallery through both the divorce hearings and the criminal trial, helping Ryan organize and scan documents when the spreadsheet threatened to overwhelm us. She was a dental hygienist at a practice in Harlan, and she had the kind of grounded competence that reminded me of what a real partnership is supposed to look like. I hosted the engagement dinner, steaks on the grill, Ryan's grandmother's cornbread made from memory, a cake from the bakery on Main Street. We sat around the table that night. Me, Ryan, Amber, and Amber's parents, Tom and Linda Lawson. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, the future felt like something worth leaning into rather than something to be endured. Tom Lawson shook my hand and told me that Ryan was a good man, and I said, "He gets that from the work, not from me." And Tom said, "He gets it from watching you do the work." That landed somewhere deep, and I had to look away for a moment to collect myself. Amber's mother, Linda, hugged me at the end of the night and whispered, "We are proud to be family." I walked Ryan and Amber to the door and watched them head to his truck, her arm through his. And I thought that if the only good thing to come out of these last 2 years was my son finding a partner who stood with him through the worst, then maybe that was enough to balance the ledger. Restitution payments from Megan began arriving in November 2025. $500 a month, routed through the court system into an account I had opened for that single purpose. I deposited each check and did not spend a dollar of it. I did not want the money for myself. I wanted a complete, documented, indisputable record that the debt had been paid in full, every cent accounted for. And then I wanted to close the book on it forever and never open it again. The shop celebrated its 17th anniversary that spring, and I marked it by replacing the old, hand-painted sign out front with a professionally made one. Clean white letters on a dark blue background. Ryan helped me bolt it to the exterior wall on a Saturday morning while Cassie and Marcus ribbed us from inside the bay about our leveling skills, and Janet came out with her thermos to inspect it for spelling errors. The sign read, "Weber's Garage, established 2008. And underneath, in smaller letters, "Craig and Ryan Weber, proprietors." I had added Ryan's name without telling him, and when he saw it, he stood in the parking lot for a solid 30 seconds without speaking. Then he turned to me and said, "Thanks, Dad." That was all he said. It was enough. I still think about Megan sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet and there is nothing to distract me from the weight of memory. I do not hate her. I tried for a while, in those first raw weeks, and I found that hatred takes more energy than rebuilding a transmission and produces absolutely nothing useful. What I feel now is something closer to a deep and settled sadness. For the years that were real, for the years that were not, for the son who lost his mother to her own choices. Megan is scheduled for parole consideration in the fall of this year. Ryan asked me recently whether I planned to attend the hearing to make a statement, and I told him no. I have said everything I need to say to the legal system, and I have said everything I need to say to Megan, and there is nothing a parole board hearing room would add to either conversation. Whether she gets out and what she does with her life in the years that follow is no longer my concern and no longer my burden. I wish her no harm and no particular good. I wish her the clarity to understand what she did to her family and to the people who trusted her, and the strength to never repeat any of it. That is as generous as I can manage, and I think it is enough. The shop is busy these days, busier than it has ever been, and that fact alone feels like the truest and most satisfying form of justice I could ask for. We run 3 lifts now. Ryan passed his ASE Master Technician certification last month, which means the Weber name carries professional weight in this county that goes beyond a hand-painted sign. Cassie just diagnosed a persistent misfire on a BMW X3 that 2 other shops could not find. A hairline crack in the intake manifold that only opened under thermal expansion at operating temperature. The kind of puzzle that separates a real mechanic from someone who just swaps parts until the light goes off. Marcus is training a new apprentice, a 19-year-old kid from Cumberland named Dwayne, who reminds me of Ryan at that age. Shows up early, asks the right questions, is not afraid of dirty hands or long hours. Janet keeps the books clean and balanced to the penny, the coffee brews by the parts counter all day, and the lifts go up and down from dawn until the last customer leaves the lot. Every morning I walk through the bay door at 6:30, flip on the fluorescent lights, and hear the compressor kick on with that familiar wheeze and thump. I know exactly where I am. I am standing in the place I built with my own 2 hands, surrounded by people who earn their keep through honest labor, doing work that matters to every person who drives into that parking lot and trusts me with their vehicle. That is not everything in the world, but after what I have survived and what my son and I have come through together, it is more than enough. Justice had been served. The guilty were punished, the innocent were healing, and we had made it through, together. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We will see you in the next one.